So I was looking at this video by MotionXP about doing morph transitions in After Effects using match cuts, and I found it really interesting. A match cut is a film editing technique where the visual elements of two successive shots are matched in such a way that they create a seamless transition between scenes. So while watching this, I kept wondering if I could replicate this effect in Storyline. So that's what we'll be doing in this video. We will attempt to fake a morph shape transition by using match cuts. So I created a triangle on the left and the square on the right, and I'll first try and do this transition using only motion paths. So I created a motion path for the triangle and dragged the end of the path right to the center of the slide. What I'm looking for here is to make this transition happen fast, so I need a high speed and a short duration to achieve this. I set the duration of the path to 0.25 seconds and the speed to bounce. Then I created a path for my square on the right. I set the endpoint to the center of the screen, right on top of the other endpoint, the one for the triangle's motion path. Then I will open the path options and click on the reverse path direction button so that the animation now starts from the center of the screen. I also added some eases to both motion paths. You can find them under path options and the direction. For the left one, I chose a linear ease of in, which gradually accelerates the motion of an object at the beginning of an animation, which will create a smooth start without any initial delay or buildup of speed. And for the square, I chose an ease of out, which gradually decelerates the motion of an object at the end of an animation, which will create a smooth slowdown without any abrupt stops or jerky movements. Okay, then since both motion paths were set to a duration of 0.25 seconds, I reduced the duration of the timeline to 0.5 seconds, and I made it so that the timeline for the square starts right at the 0.25 second mark, and I set the end of the timeline for the triangle to that point as well. That way, when our animation for the triangle ends, the triangle disappears, and the square appears and moves along its motion path, and it gives off the impression that it's one continuous animation from the left edge all the way to the right edge. And I tested this out and it worked well enough, but it was a little fast, so I set each motion path's duration to 0.5 seconds and adjusted the timeline so that it was 1 second long. And this gave me quite a nice result. By using motion paths and a match cut effect, it seemed that our triangle was morphing into a square. So now what I want is to see how we could refine this effect. I wanted to see if I could get it a bit more polished and a bit closer to the effect MotionXP showcased in his video, where he animated not only the position but the rotation of the elements as well. And it looked more natural, I suppose. And to achieve that, we are going to use the GSAP JavaScript library to animate the shapes. First off, we have to ensure that we can select both objects. So I've set the accessibility text for the triangle to triangle and the one for the square to square. And I deleted the motion paths and reset the timelines so the objects will show from beginning to end. We won't be using the storyline timeline moving forward. Then I'm going to create an execute JavaScript trigger, which will run when the timeline starts on the slide. So after a lot of trial and error, here's what I came up with. First off, I selected my two shapes using the accessibility text name and store each of them in a variable. Then I declared a GSAP timeline and stored it in a variable called timeline. This GSAP timeline has a repeat of -1, which means that it will run forever. And I also set a yo-yo to true, which means that after the animation has completed, it will play in reverse until it reaches its starting point. With these two parameters set, our animation will play indefinitely. So now I set the opacity of the square to 0 at the start of the animation, so we don't see it once the animation begins to play. Then, over 1 second, this line moves the triangle from an initial position of 0 and a slight rotation of -20 to plus 150% towards the right and a rotation of 0. I also gave it an ease of elastic.in for some character and acceleration at the beginning of the animation. So once that movement completes, the triangle is made invisible. And then the square is made visible with an opacity of 1 and a rotation of 0. Then, for a duration of 1 second, the square moves to a position of -150% on the x-axis. So it moves from that position to 0% in the rotation of 20, with an ease of elastic.out, which means it will decelerate towards the end of the animation. What's great about this is that you can then change out the objects for other images, and the animation will stay the same if the objects are about the same size. You could also have fully interactable buttons be animated like this. Here are some buttons I created. I changed the first one's accessibility name to triangle and the second one's accessibility name to square. And now they animate, but I can click on them while the animation is running, which is fantastic. You could also create a morph transition using match cuts without even changing the position of the object. Here's one example in which I only affected the rotation. The ghost spins around and then becomes a star in the middle of the animation. This animation looks like something out of a cartoon or an Adam West Batman transition. I think this came out even better than changing the position of the objects. The morph effect in this one seems way more believable. This was a really fun experiment, and it just goes to show how much is possible in Storyline, especially when you combine it with JavaScript and GSAP.